My name is Sarah Hart. I'm the acting provost here at Gresham. Just a few little housekeeping things before we start the lecture. If an alarm goes off in the room, there is nothing planned, so that will mean we all need to exit via the fire exits that are clearly marked at the back, and then staff will guide us to the gathering point. So tonight's lecture will be followed by a few minutes for asking questions. So if you are watching online, welcome. You will see in front of you when that moment comes a QR code which you can scan, and that will lead you to Slido, which will allow you to ask questions. And I have a tablet over here, so if anyone sees me in the lecture looking at a tablet, I am not checking my emails. I am looking to see what the questions are that are coming in. Those of you in the room, we have an amazing technology called raising your hand, and if you do that at the appropriate moment, a microphone will be brought to you by our lovely assistants, and you'll be able to ask your question. So let's get on with the lecture, because you don't really want to hear any more from me. You want to hear from our wonderful Gresham Professor of Geometry, Alain Gorielli, who tonight will speak on the fascinating subject of the shape of plants, why plants love mathematics, and mathematicians love plants. So let's welcome Alain Gorielli.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you all for coming, and for people watching online, if there are any. So today, as part of this series on the geometry of nature, I'm going to continue our exploration of the natural world through the eyes of mathematics. And what better place than our own back garden? So let me show you why plants love math by taking a tour in my mathematical garden. I'm going to show you some very simple plants, beautiful picture by Victor Mosqueda, who's graciously shared a lot of his picture, and you can find them on his Instagram website. You should go and have a look. Beautiful structure. I'm just going to go and look at, these plants have triangles, a trifold symmetry, as you can see here, and each of these leaves themselves have little triangle that can fold if you touch it or with too much light. Okay, do we have anything that triangle? Yes, we have pentagons, as you can see from this one. This is Stapelia gigantea. It's a spineless stem succulent plant from South Africa. How about this one, an hexagon, a Stapelia flavopurpurea. It's a tiny little six-pointed star shape, also from Southern Africa. So very nice structure. Can we see other one? Plenty of polygons. This one is a 10-sided polygon from a South American genus of cacti. Typically they're round, but they can also be longer. And this one even more beautiful. I kept it for the last of my polygon. This is a 21-side polygon. It's a spoon-petal African daisy, also from South Africa, and recognizable by its distinctive tubula, the spoon-shaped purple petal. Beautiful structure, and if you zoom on the picture, you can see also this beautiful structure, this little piece there, what we call primordia, and we'll hear more about that in a second. And you can see a 5.5 little buds here structure that develop as the plant grows into this arrangement. Do we have anything else? Yes, there are plenty. Sphere, for instance, the dahlia, almost perfect sphere. Or does it arrive at such an arrangement? Here is another sphere, Oya publicalis. But the one I'm mostly going to talk about tonight are spirals. Spirals everywhere in plants. They really dominate the plants. And once you understand the spiral, you can understand all the other ones. More spirals. But probably the king of all the mathematical structure, the most amazing and beautiful one, is this one, Romanesco broccoli. And you really should spend some time looking at it and take a magnifying glass and look at it closer, then go and look even closer. Let's do that. And when you look at it, it's like an alien landscape. What you see a spiral, and each of these spirals is made of other buds that are themselves spiral. And on these, you have buds that also spiral. If I keep zooming on another one, look at these. These are also little buds that have their own spiral in each one. So this is what we call, in mathematics, it has fractal structure, the same structure repeated at different length scale. So we want to understand all these order, this structure. And the first step in botany, in biology, is trying to describe things, classify things. And in botany, this is called phyllotaxis. So phyllotaxis not surprisingly, is the description of phyllomes on a plant. So what are phyllomes? Phyllomes are leaf, sepal, petals, stamens, carpels, floral organs, or any other lateral appendage on a plant stem or axis. And that classification dates from the 18th century, from Charles Bonnet, who did a lot of work on phyllotaxis. He re-established the field. And one of the simplest ones is what's called a disticus pattern, where the leaves are 180 degrees. So you want one leaf, and the next one is 180, and the next one 180. Okay, that's a very simple one. And I expect that when you go out now in the garden, you realize, aha, this is this pattern versus another one. Here is a decussate patterns. Here is you have a pair of leaves, and the next pair of leaves is 90 degrees, and the next pair of leaves is 90 degrees, and it alternates like that. The third type is a whorl patterns. And in the whorl patterns, you have 3 or more leaves at the same nodes, and they stack like that. Okay, there is another type that I'm not going to mention, which is a 5-fold symmetry, but the one that we'll be mostly interested in is the spiral patterns. And the spiral patterns, the leaf move, but not by an angle of 90 or 180 degrees. They move along a spiral, and that spiral is seen also in the flower itself. And the best example, the well-known example, is the sunflower. So if I start looking now more in detail, the sunflower, this is the capitulum of the sunflower, the head of the sunflower. And what you see is an extraordinarily beautiful structure that also encodes, just as you look at it, the development of the plant itself. The new buds, the little things that you see, they are called primordia. They are green initially, and then they move away from the center, where they develop into these almost petals. These are not actually petals. These are florets. They're tubular flower, which open sequentially. And they are specialized sterile flowers that serve to attract pollinators. But what the eye catches right away when you look at that are spiral on the sunflower, right? You see spiral going like that, spiral going like that. So we're going to look at these primordia, this little bud, this almost polygon shape. And what we do is say, okay, we're going to start with one and look at its neighbor and neighbor and neighbor and try to follow a spiral with it. And when you do that, this is the kind of things that you have. Okay, that's an interesting observation. And here is on another head. You count, for instance, you count the number. That's what we do in mathematics, we count. That's also what botanists do when they try to classify, they just count. And that number is 34, counterclockwise spiral. And you can do, but you also see spiral going the other way, clockwise spiral, right? The eye you can easily draw. It's a little nice exercise, and you draw them and find them. And on the same heads, on the same capitulum, you'll find on this 121. So that's already interesting. The number of spiral in one way is different than the other one. And these are important for the classification of in phyllotaxis, and they're called parastiki number. It's always great to have new words. So the parastiki numbers or pairs are, for this picture here, for this particular sunflower head, 2134. Do we find other numbers? Yes, absolutely. For instance, here is Aeonium. It's a succulent plant native to the Canary Islands. And what you have, if you do the same type of work, following the different leaves here, you find 3 and 5, okay? These are the parastiki number for this structure, 3, 5. Another interesting one that you can all play, especially around the end of the year, are pine cones. And typically, you'll find this number 8 and 13. Okay. Here is another thing you can do. You can go to the supermarket and buy a pineapple and look at it. So I did that. You know, this is part of the geometry of nature. So I bring you nature here for my show and tell. So this is a pineapple I bought over the weekend. And I put push pins along the diagonal. So each of these little patch that you see on a pineapple is called an eye, and it's a fruit in itself. So it's a compound inflorescence, the pineapple. And you can look at the pineapple, if you see here. So I code by color the left-handed spiral, and you can check there are 13 going around like that, right? And if you go the other way, there are 8 going the other way. So there are 8 spiral like that. And it's very typical. Pick up any, go and buy 10 different pineapples, They're very cheap for some reason right now. And you'll find all these, the same number appearing over and over again, 8 and 13. If I took completely different plant, a succulent plant here, for instance, you can find different numbers on the same plant. For instance, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. Again, it's all picture and the spiral also made by Victor. On the same plant, you find this number, more parastiki number. And of course, you ask me, what about the Romanesco? I didn't bring one today, sorry. But the Romanesco also has main parastiki number, beautiful pictures, where you find 8 in one way and 13. And if you go in the substructure that also have this spiral, 8 and 13 again, and so on. So first observation, we have numbers. And what are these numbers? The typical number that you find, almost universally, are 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, and all. So I know that we have a very sophisticated audience here, mathematically sophisticated, and people will say, ooh, I've read Dan Brown. I know what these numbers are. This is the Fibonacci sequence, and we'll get back to that in a minute. So how universal is it? Did I pick this example just to have this number? It's actually completely universal. When people do like thousands of pine cone and count all these spiral, 95 to 97% of them are either directly Fibonacci or very closely related to a Fibonacci sequence. So very large study, they've shown that. So that's the first observation. These numbers systematically appear when you look at plants. And that's our first observation, our first piece of a puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is that angle that I told you about in the spiral patterns. If you look at the sunflower and the leaf, you can look at the angle between one leaf and the next one and call it D, and the same angle is found after and after. And that typical angle that you find in plants is 137.5 degrees. And if you look again on a bunch of plants and observation, this number is extremely well conserved, 137.5. So we have a typical angle of rotation for the plants. That's the second piece of the puzzle. And this was very puzzling, not only for me, but for the greatest biologist of all time, Charles Darwin, so much so that in May 1861, he wrote a letter to his friend Isaac Gray. Isaac Gray is the great American botanist that named so many of the North American plants. The letter is wonderful. He says, if you wish to save me from a miserable death, not being tragic or anything, do tell me why the angle of 1/2, 1/3, 2/5, 3/8 series occur and no other angles. It is enough to drive the quietest man mad. Did you and some mathematician publish some paper on the subject? To which his friend wrote back and said, I have no idea, and I don't know any mathematician, but I wish you good health. The same question came back after. So it was a time at the end of the 19th century where a lot of the work on these phyllotaxis came, and a lot of progress was made. 90 years later, 1951, Alan Turing, very interested in morphogenesis, done some of the seminal work that we still use in animal morphogenesis, got interested in plant, and in a letter to his friend John Young, write, I think I have an idea to explain these Fibonacci numbers that appears and how they involve. And we have a lot of drawing and notes, and he wrote a full manuscript about that. We have a draft, it's very hard to understand, but a big draft that he was working on in 1952. With very nice picture like this one, and in the corner you can see the number 137 if you look closely enough. So he was very interested in trying to understand, and his idea was there was an active zone that was controlling the expansion of this pattern. But as you know, Alan Turing died in mysterious circumstances in 1954 and never finished the draft. But the ideas, and we go back to that, are still interesting. So we have a bit of work to do. We've seen these Fibonacci numbers, and we've seen this divergence angle 137.5. And so I want to take a break here from the botany and go to a little bit of mathematics and try to see what do we know about this and how might they be related before I go back to plants. So let's try goal. Fibonacci series, we know that from the book Liber Abaci, which literally means the book of computation, is the book of Leonardo da Pizza Bonacci from 1202. It's a very important book because this is the book where Fibonacci popularized the Indo-Arabic numeral system in the Western world, the 0, 1, 2, 9. This is the first digital revolution, the introduction of digit in the Western world. And as part of the book, he had a very nice little cute problem about rabbits reproducing, and the solution of the problem is the Fibonacci series. And the Fibonacci series is very easy to create. You start with 1 and 1, and then you add them, you obtain 2. And then you add 2 and 1, the 2 previous one, and you obtain 3. 2 previous one, you obtain 5. 2 plus 3 is 5. And you go on like that, 8, blah, 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 233, 337, up to infinity like that. So if you write in a very compact way, you say that F1 is 1, F2 is 1, and any other one is the sum of the 2 previous ones. But of course, if the number keeps increasing, it's hard to see the structure. However, there is something very nice you can do, is you can look at the ratio of 2 consecutive numbers, Fibonacci numbers. Okay, so I defined this ratio to be Rn, is the ratio of Fn plus 1 divided by Fn. And the question is, what is this ratio? Well, let's try. If the first one is 1, 2, 3 half, 5 third, 8 fifth, 13 8, and so on. And the numerical value are interesting because you go to 1.5, 1.66, 1.6, 1.625, and very rapidly, within, if I add a few more, and approach a value of 1.618, and as n become increasing large, it only change further and further digit. So that's what we call it converges to a value, at least numerically. It looks like it converges to a value. And what mathematicians like to do, of course, is that, okay, let's try to find what that value is. What is the limit as n goes to infinity of the ratio of consecutive Fibonacci numbers? Okay, so let's assume that limit exists, and let's call it R for better. And with a little bit of work, it's really 2 or 3 lines of manipulation that are in the write-up that's available on the website. You can show that the limit R solves a very simple equation, which is that R is equals to 1 plus the inverse of R. And this is really a defining equation, so let's remember it. The limit R is it's a number that's equals to 1 plus its inverse. How do we know what that number is? Well, we try to solve the equation. We multiply both sides by R, so that gives me R squared equals R plus 1, and put everything on the same side, so I get a quadratic equation. Aha! Remember quadratic equation, minus b plus or minus square root over 2a. And then you have 2 solutions, but only one is positive. And since we know the ratio we're looking for is a positive one, we look at the positive solution. And that positive solution is 1 plus square root 5 over 2. Aha! And people recognize that. It's a very famous one. It's called the golden ratio. Phi equals 1 plus square root 5 over 2, approximately 1.618. And why is it important? Well, it has very nice properties, and now we think it's very important, parts of the mythology of mathematics. It first came in the work of Euclid, didn't call it the golden ratio, in a geometric problem that we're going to talk about because it's important for our story. And then it really became a kind of mythical symbol in the 16th century by the work of Luca Pacioli. On his work, he called it the divine proportion because it was like Christian Trinity, uniting 3 different things at the same time. And that's where it started. And the name golden ratio only came in the end of the 19th century by James Sully. And the letter phi that you see here was introduced in the early 20th century, mistakenly in the honor of Phidias, who was the artistic director of the Parthenon. So we have that now defined. We see that the golden ratio, this number can be obtained as the limit of two Fibonacci numbers as they increase, but it has also a nice geometric property first discussed by Euclid in 300 BCE. And what is that? It's a beautiful problem, very simple, so let me try to explain that to you. Think of a rectangle, and I'm looking for particle rectangle that has the following property. The rectangle I can divide in a square and another rectangle, so let's do that. And I'm asking what is the ratio of the rectangle, ratio being the long side divided by the short side, so that the new rectangle that I have also has the same ratio, that the long side over the short side of the new rectangle is the same. Here I have the square, and here I have the new rectangle. And what I want is that the rectangle, same ratio, same aspect ratio, so that if I turn it and increase it, it's the same again. Okay? And so if that's true, the new rectangle, I can do the same. I can put a square in there, and that new pink rectangle also has the same ratio, because I don't care about size. So I can repeat that and repeat and repeat and repeat, right? And keep doing that until each of these rectangles always have the same ratio. Very nice property. So let's try to solve. That's the geometric problem. Can I find the aspect ratio of a rectangle so that when I cut it with a square and a rectangle, the new rectangle has the same aspect ratio? It's a simple problem in math, so let's try to do that. Here is my rectangle. The long side is now a plus b, and the short side is a. So the ratio is a plus b over a, and I want that the new rectangle has the same ratio. In the new rectangle, the long side is a, and the short side is b. So I want a plus b over a, big rectangle, equals a over b, small rectangle. That's great. A plus b over a I can simplify. That's 1 plus b over a equals a over b. And I've introduced r to be that ratio, a over b. You see b over a is 1 over r. And what I find is 1 plus 1 over r equals r. Remember, I told you it was important. 1 plus 1 over r defines the golden ratio. So the golden ratio describes that specific ratio of rectangle that has these wonderful properties. The smaller part goes into the larger as the larger goes into the whole. A over b is phi. But I can also look geometrically at a circle, and that's also very nice. Now, if I take a circle and divide in two sections, one going of length A and the other one of length B, and I ask that to be the golden ratio, I can ask, what is that special angle alpha in the middle if B over A is that ratio? Again, very easy to do. I take 360 degrees, and I find the section of that, the fraction it does. And the fraction is 360 degrees divided by phi squared. And that is approximately 137.5, the golden angle. Aha, things are finally coming together. We started observing Fibonacci numbers. Fibonacci numbers are related to golden ratio. Golden ratio defines the golden angle that's also found in plants. Okay, that's great. So there's been many myths related to the golden ratio, such as it's used in Greek temple or as being the most pleasing ratio. Most of it is complete nonsense, so be extremely careful if you read it online or whatever. Most of it is nonsense, but a place in art and architecture where it has definitely been used is the work of Le Corbusier. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Paris for visiting the Fondation Le Corbusier, and there you can find some of his early drawing where he draws plants, and maybe that's why he has this inspiration. A lot of the work of Le Corbusier, he had this entire system, he wrote a couple books on that, called the modulo, which is the golden ratio, the golden module in French. It has an entire system of proportion based on that in his work. And for instance, if you go to Cité Radieuse, I once visited, I have a friend who lived there, it's absolutely fabulous ideas in architecture. The different modules are created respecting this ratio. Everything is based on this idea. I don't think the ratio was particularly important. All the innovation in the Cité Radieuse, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, actually much more interesting than its use of the golden ratio. But it was fundamental in his work. Now, let's go back to a little bit more math. There is another strange properties of the golden ratio that you probably haven't seen yet. Let's start again with the same equation. Remember, phi is 1 plus its inverse. That's how we define. And now I'm going to do something a little bit cheeky here. I said, look at this phi here and the last. Well, I know phi is equals to 1 plus its inverse, so why don't I replace phi by 1 plus its inverse? Well, I get this expression. Doesn't look like I've made any progress. No, it's longer, a little bit more complicated, but why not? It's still true. It's a true equality. But what if I do it again? I replace the one in the bottom, in the little square, by 1 plus 1 over phi. And I get another. OK, what about if I do it again? And you know, mathematicians, when they get going, after a few times, they say, OK, I'll go the whole way, like all in. And again, and again, and again, and again, to infinity. And all of a sudden, you have a description of phi equals 1 plus 1 over 1 plus 1 over 1 plus 1 over 1 plus 1. OK, so that's an interesting math object. It's not something we usually teach in school. It's called a continued fraction, and the continued fraction of the golden ratio is very particular. So in general, a golden fraction, you can define a number of digits, a0, a1, let's take them as integer, for instance. Just like you would write a digit of a number, you can write a continued fraction for a number as a series of digits, right? And the particular one, what's special about the continued fraction is that it has only one. And instead of writing infinitely many one, I write one with a bar, meaning there are infinitely many of them. And what's interesting is that just like I can truncate a number written with digits to get an approximation, I can do the same here and says, OK, I'm only going to keep a certain number of 1. If I keep 2 of them, I have 1 plus 1 over 1 plus 1, and that's 1 plus 1/2, which is 3/2. If I keep 2 of them, I have 5/3. If I keep 3 of them, I have 8/5. And now I find a rational approximation of the golden numbers in terms of the Fibonacci sequence, right? All these numbers. And that connection between the two was first made by Kepler, the same Kepler for the Kepler law in the 17th century. And what's interesting is that not only is a rational approximation, the rational approximation you obtain from the continued fraction is, in some sense, the best approximation of that number. So it's a way to approximate an irrational number, one that you cannot write exactly as a fraction, right? It's an approximation of a fraction. OK, now we have a lot of different pieces to play with, and we can go back to plans and try to see how these pieces fit now that we have a little bit more knowledge. And I'm going to start with the defining characteristic of that divergent angle. OK? So if I look at a plant, here is Arabidopsis thaliana, it's the model system for plants, it's the one that's used for all genetics, and you start looking a little bit here, what you have here is where the action takes place. Right at the tip there, the little bud, there is a small region called the shoot apical meristem where everything happens, where all the structure is organized and is just amplified as it grows after. And so there is a very little region, about 200 microns in size. And if you look at it, it's very well protected, so it's not easy. But of course, experimentalists are great, so you can open it and under the right microscopy, and you turn it, and what you see from above is a structure like that. So this is the meristem. This is where new cell and new primordia occurs. So the one in green here, P1, P2, P3, are primordia that are formed buds, and they might be for leaves earlier on, or seeds or petals or something like that later on. And the P1 is the last one that was created, right? P2 was before that, and P3, so the oldest one have the largest number. Once a structure is created, the plant keeps growing, and it's pushed away, and a new bud forms. But the interesting thing for us is that if you look how they dispose, if you assume that it's a plane now, you'll find that in a good approximation, the different P's are on a spiral, P1, P2, P3, the different primordia happens on a spiral. And this spiral is a firm spiral. That means that the radius grows as the square root of the angle. So as the angle increases, the radius grows quite slowly. That's why it's bunched up. So here is a purely geometric construction. Let's assume that primordia are formed on a spiral and that they are formed with the same angle every time, right? So we place a primordium at every angle d. This is the first one, and then we place the next one at d angle later, the divergence angle, and then the next one here, and then the next one there, and there, and there, and so on, and we populate. And now the question is, if I know the divergence angle, what are the patterns that I obtain from the primordia as they grow? Okay, start with a very simple one. What if I choose a fraction of 360 degrees? So in this case, 360 degrees divided by 5, that's 72, applies a primordium every 72 degrees. Well, what you expect is to have a pattern like that as it grows, right? Place it goes, and that's a 5-arm structure. What happens if I move them by, let's say, half a degree? Well, if I move half a degree, I miss the exact pattern, you know, like in this old movie where you see the wheel in a cart going left and right, you miss the exact periodicity of it, and what you have a nice spiral, either going left or right. So now we have spiral appearing, that's interesting. But the real question is, what's special about the golden angle? So now if we try the golden angle and we start populate, what we see is quite remarkable. Right away, what we see is very much like the sunflowers. And the bigger the structure is, the bigger it grows, the more spiral a form. So the number of Fibonacci that you find, the parasticking, really depend on how big that structure is. If it's a small one, you find small Fibonacci numbers. And if it's the bigger one, you find more and more spiral as it goes on the outside. What happens if I move it just by a little bit, by half a degree? Well, in this case, something else interesting. It's completely different. You think that, right, if you close to 137, it wouldn't make a difference, but it does make a difference. Right away, you see the packing is completely different, right? Whereas the one in the middle is completely packed. There is no empty space. If I move a little bit that angle, right away, I have these patterns that loses the spiral on the right or start combining different spiral on the left. Very different one. And indeed, because of the golden angle, because the golden ratio is an irrational number, the packing is almost optimal. This is one of the best choices you can have. It's one of the best choices you can have, but it's not the only choice. For instance, if I take another rational number, square root 2, the first irrational number in the history of mathematics, and if you look at 360 divided by square root of 2, and note the continued fraction of square root of 2, it's also a beauty. It's 1 and 2 forever, so it's 1 plus 1 over 2 plus blah, 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 blah. Okay, if I do that, I also populate quite heavily almost optimally. See, there is no empty space, and you also see spiral. So yes, the golden angle give optimal packing, but it's not the only one. And so that goes back to the anxiety of Darwin. It says, yes, we know that the golden angle works, but there is no real understanding at this time of why is that, in what sense is optimal, or if it's selected through evolution. But there is a very nice point here. There is a big difference between irrational number and rational numbers, and plants know that. So another way to look at that is, let's take a grid of integer point in the plane. So I look at my x-axis from 0 to infinity, and my y-axis to 0 to infinity, and I place a dot at every integer point. Okay, these are the black dot. If I now look at a straight line from 0, 0 to 3, 5, the slope that I have is 5 over 3 times x. The slope is a rational number. And because it's a rational number, that line is going to hit infinitely many points on that lattice of integer points. By construction or by contradiction, if the slope is irrational, it's going to miss all these integer points. Otherwise, you can show that it should be rational by contradiction. So what's special about the slope of phi, the golden ratio? I can look at that. Well, there is something very nice that you see, is that it also misses all the points, but sometimes it gets close to the point. It gets close to 2, 3, 3/5, 5, 8, all the approximation. This is where that line gets close to it. It's almost a rational number. But there is something special that mathematicians have proved, is that in this sense, you can ask the question, which is the line, which slope is such that it misses the most all the integer points, in some sense, the furthest away from any rational point? And the answer is, it's the golden ratio. The golden ratio is that special one that misses the most. And that's why it's connected to the most efficient packing on the head of the sunflower and teas. And we see that, very strangely, plants in this structure, the plants make a difference between rational and irrational number, which is, of course, completely human creation. But there is a fundamental difference that appears here. But of course, I started with a geometric model that says, well, I know it's on a spiral, and I just put little thing. So what it tells you, what that construction tells you, is that if I start with the golden angle, I can explain the parasitic number. The Fibonacci comes naturally by populating. It doesn't explain why this spiral appears. And in order to do that, I have to do more work. I have to go back and really try to understand what's actually happening in the development of plants. And so I get to go back to the shoot apical meristem here and look at what's going on. And a very important chemical playing a role in the development of plants is auxin. It's a class of plant hormones, it's a morphogen, and it regulates cell elongation, division, differentiation. It's included in all kind of plant development process. And the idea is that it loses cell walls, and under turgor pressure, because the walls are thinner, the walls increase in size, and that's why you have buds appearing. So auxin is responsible for that. So auxin is being constantly produced in the meristem, and being sucked up by the growing entities. So what happens is that P2, for instance here, pull all the auxin away from the meristem. There is specialized way of transporting that. And the same is true for P3. But in order for new primordium to appear, it also needs auxin. And it will appear at the place where the auxin is maximal. And the place where the auxin is maximal is the place where it's the least taken up. So it's the furthest away from a new primordial event where auxin is maximal, so it's the furthest away from the previous one. It's the largest available space, and that explains. And if you put that together, then now you start to have a real mechanism of how things are done. And you can put this mechanism now in a computational model, and that's been done by my friend Richard Smith, who is now at John Innes Center for Plant Science in Norwich, and Przemysław Przysienkiewicz, who is work in Canada. And the idea is the following. Now you have a dome structure, and the new primordia appears, and they move down, and at the same time you compute the concentration of auxin, and you look and you place a new one where the concentration of auxin is maximal. Okay, you can put it all together. There are many different parts. In particular, you need to understand the mechanics of how these cells expand and rules about how they divide and so on. But they've put that all together in a beautiful paper. And if you do that, this is what you observe. So you haven't put any golden T's or golden data of Fibonacci. This is just partial differential equation for concentration, reaction diffusion, mechanics, rule about growth and all that. And what appears for a large range of parameters, naturally you have an emergent structure. These primordia starts to organize themselves in the largest available space. And what you have is, after a while, the primordia occurs at this special angle. So the divergent angle now, which was the missing piece, or who decides what's the divergent angle, you see appears naturally through the physical and chemical interaction of all these different processes. There's still a lot of questions. It's a very active subject about how it occurs, but at least it gave us some idea about what's going on. Now, I want to shift a little bit, and I want to show you how we managed, with Derek Moulton, my colleague in Oxford, to embed a little bit of mathematics and phyllotaxis in a major Hollywood blockbuster. So around 2010, people from Warner Bros. Were interested to make a second movie of Sherlock Holmes, the first movie directed by Guy Ritchie, this one also called A Game of Shadow. But this one would have Moriarty in the movie, played by Jared Harris. And they ask us, can you help us with idea about the script or things like that, and design the board that you see behind you. And then we delve into it and learn a lot about Sherlock, about Moriarty, and give them plenty of ideas that ended up in the movie. So what do we know about Jared Harris, or Moriarty in this case? What we know from the movie, from the books, is that he was a mathematician, professor of mathematics in a small university, witty, charming, high dome, with a high forehead. I'm thinking maybe Gresham College, professor of geometry, if you ask me. Yeah, could be. We also know that he wrote a book on the binomial theorem. And so we put a lot of these ideas and other books that we give them hints about what to do. But the key part is to be found in the blackboard, and it's this scene where you see the two. We actually went on set for the shoot, where all the clues are there, and Sherlock Holmes is going to go there, confront Moriarty, and find the clues that he needs to solve and to stop the evil deeds of Moriarty. And the clues are in the scene. They're not only on the board, and there are multiple clues. First, let's have a look at the boards, beautiful boards. I can go on forever about the different aspects of it and what it contains, and the mathematics of the time, and how Moriarty used that for ballistic and so on. But what I want to look at here are the two clues. The first one is here. You recognize maybe the Pascal triangle. And the second one is that little book there that we'll get in a second. The first one, the Pascal triangle. So why is there a Pascal triangle? Well, Moriarty wrote a book on the binomial theorem, and as you know, the coefficient of the binomial expansion had to be found in the Pascal triangle. So, for instance, a plus b squared is a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, and so that the coefficient 1 to 1 are in the Pascal triangle. And so a plus b to the n, you'll find at the line n plus 1 all the coefficient. Very beautiful structure that was already known in the early 14th century by a Chinese mathematician. So we have these. Also note, the interesting thing is that if you sum horizontal line of the Pascal triangle, you get all the powers of 2, which is normal because it's 1 plus 1 to the n, so it's 2 to the n, right? So you get 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. And so you could use the Pascal triangle to do binary coding, if you want. But what you probably don't know is that if instead of looking at a horizontal line, the Pascal triangle, you incline the line just a little bit, what you obtain are different numbers. You sum them, and you get 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. Aha! Fibonacci appear naturally from the Pascal triangle. If you change the orientation of the line, you get higher, what we call Fibonacci code, which is still the sum of the two, but slightly different. And indeed, on the board, you see these numbers appearing here. And so the idea that we had and that we gave them is that Moriarty was using Fibonacci code to encode secret messages that he would give to these henchmen in order to do these evil deeds. And they would look at the Fibonacci code, get a number, and that would give them a page and a place in a book to look at what the words for the instruction was. And that's the second clue. It's the book here on the side. It's called The Art of Domestic Horticulture. I don't think the book really exists, but that's what they use. And in that, so that's an horticulture book where that is the cipher. That's where you have to go in order to decode to see what the message is. And the third clue in the same scene is the dead flowers. Not surprising in the mathematician offices, but the idea is he has a book on domestic horticulture, so he knows about plants, he's interested in plants, but the flowers are dead, so the book has another purpose, and the purpose is for communication with that. And of course, due to extraordinary deductive powers of Sherlock Holmes, in the scene he managed to understand all of that and put it together. That was how messages are being transmitted, and managed to decode, as we see later in the movie, at the end, the explanation, very short shot, because most of it is action scene, of course. And you see, again, the decoding using the Fibonacci code, the Fibonacci series. And that's how phyllotaxis helps solve crimes. Okay, So now that we're still on the topic of evil, plot, and murder, I want to talk about dangerous flower, carnivorous flower. So that enormous flower there that you see is called the Titan arum, or corpse flower. So we're still on the topic. It's a native of the rainforest of Sumatra. It's one of the largest flowers that it is. It's very well known for its immense size, but also its strong odor. It's similar to rotting flesh, and that's used to attract beetles and flesh fly for pollination. And next to it is my friend Chris Thorogood, who is the scientific director at the Oxford Botanic Garden, and passionate about carnivorous plants. And so a few years ago, he came and we had discussion. We work on a lot of different projects. And we started working on his favorite plants, which are Nepenthes, together with Adrien Oliveri, who is at the Max Planck Institute for Plants in Cologne. And again, Derek, who's always doing fun projects with me. And what are Nepenthes? So Nepenthes are called pitcher plant. Here is a painting from Chris Thorogood, who is immensely talented, not only in science and exploration. He wrote a whole book that you should look called Pathless Forest about his adventure in the jungle and all that. But so he painted these. Nepenthes is a general tropical genus of carnivorous pitcher plant. There are 183 known species. And what's interesting for us is the shape, because they have the most astonishing diversity in morphology. There's nothing related to Phyllotaxis here because these are just modified leaves, so it's way after the early development, way later after the early development. But they have this amazing difference in size and shape and ornamentation and all that you can see in this picture. And how do they work? Well, they're very passive. They're just a trap. And here is, you'll see what happens. Insects come on the peristome, that little ledge here, and they go explore, they're interested by the smell of it, and then they fall. Even mammals fall, and we know that mammals' bones have been found in the pitcher plant. The mammals themselves are probably not the target. So this type of plant, like any carnivorous plants, are not interested in the caloric contents of their prey. What they really miss are nutrients, typically nitrogens, and so they develop in place where there is nitrogen deficiency as a way to attract that. They're very efficient, and they exist in different ecosystems and all that. And so the idea that we had is, let's do a mathematical exploration of that, and let's try to understand if we can relate the shape of the peristome, or the shape of the plant, to the insect that it captures. And the idea is that they are targeted, so they've evolved to attract a certain type of insect of a certain size that exists in that particular ecosystem. So how do we go about that? So the first step is the mathematical construction of the peristome. So what we did is we started with a single curve that represents the basic shape of the peristome, and then out of that we created a surface. And so now we have a number of parameters that describe all this shape. We can change the inclination, we can change the size of the peristome, and by just playing with a few parameters, we can fit all the different types that there exist. So that's what we call a morphospace. It's a mathematical characterization with a few parameters of the entire structure of the entire space of possible solution. And it works very well. We isolated 4 basic types that's recognized in nature, the base one, the tooth one. We still don't fully understand the trade-off between the creation of the tooth and their effect on prey catching, but we're still thinking about that. The flared one is one, or the flat one that look mostly like a toilet seat, and may act very much like that because sometimes it just attracts mammal, and what they're interested is in the droppings. So we have these. How does it work? Well, the second step now that we have these is to see whether an insect that would go on this peristome would fall inside or outside of B5. So if you look at a cross-section and you place a little 2-legged insect, this is mathematics, so you don't need 6 legs, with two parameters, which is the first is the size of the insect, which is the position of its center of mass, and the other one is the angle between the legs. So we have two parameters, rho and alpha, to describe one of these two-legged insects. And we place it at different angle. And you can compute now the mechanics of that by looking at the friction between the insect and the surface. It's a very nice problem, very non-trivial because there are 2 points of contact. So it's the underlying mechanical problem is very neat. And what you find is that there are 3 different types of behavior. You have the stability zone where the insect would be happy. It starts slipping, and then you have, tumbling. Okay? And depending now on the size of the insect and its opening of the legs, so the characterization of the insect with respect to these 2 parameters, you can find what is the friction cone, the one where it would be stable for each one. And so you can find the stability of each of these. Okay, so now we look at, remember we have a description of the surface of the Nepenthes, and we can look at each point what would happen based on these laws of friction and sliding. The green area is stable, so the insect is there safe. And one of the ideas that people have said is that it's good to have a large stable zone so that insects are first attracted and other insects come before they are trapped. I don't know. You have the black zone where the insect slides out of that, so that's a miss for the plant. That's not good in terms of efficiency. And then you have the red where they would fall inside. Yum. Okay, and so now you can look at different of these type of Nepenthes, and we did an extensive studies of different ones to try to understand the efficiency of the one we observe with respect to a given type of insect. So you take one of these, for instance, and say, here I just show one surface, but a different inclination. So if you take the same surface, but you incline it, you change the angle. And depending on the angle, you see it changes the size of the red region where you attract the insect. And so you can, based on that, define what we call efficiency for the plant, which is or likely the plan is to capture insect. And you can do that for multiple friction coefficient and change all the angle. And what you obtain is a curve of this type. So depending on that, the efficiency increases up to a maximum. The different curves correspond to different friction coefficient. And what we found is that the type of Nepenthes, Veit-Kid, that we look at, the most efficient one are found with the angle in that zone of efficiency. And so it seems to suggest, based on that the morphology and inclination of this structure is based on the ability to capture prey. And you can do that repeatedly, and then you have another idea is that, well, it does cost the plant a lot to create this new structure, so the plant has to invest energy in that it cannot use for other purpose, for instance, creating chlorophyllc leaves and all that. So there is a cost associated with that, and so must be a balance between all these. And you can try to understand that balance in terms of evolution. And so the mathematical model indicates that it's a good hypothesis. It's quite likely that the different structure that you observe are tuned for different type of insect. Unfortunately, all these Nepenthes are like in different jungle and all that, in volcano in Indonesia. And it's very hard to have systematic studies of the different ones and the insect they capture. So it is still an hypothesis, but the hypothesis and the prediction are there. And eventually, we published this in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And for once, after many tries for other papers, we even had the cover. So I'm very proud. You know, for scientists and that, they take great pride in having the covers. Most of the time, the one I'll show you next time on seashells, we had very great cover. You send their art and all that. I said, it's great, but we have a cute little penguin to put on the front cover. So, okay, So we keep working with Chris. We have a project on giant lily plants. We have a project on the squirting cucumber that we published also last year. A lot of fun. So let me conclude. What I try to show you is that plants involve Fibonacci, so aspect of number theory, aspect of optimal packing, which is problem of geometry, aspect of evolution, dynamical system. I told you a little bit about reaction diffusion equation, the one that described the evolution of auxin. You have to include the mechanics of tissue, because these tissue are being stressed by the Turger pressure. You can study these in terms of pattern formation. That include partial pattern formation. But since you have surface that evolves in time, there are also very nice aspects related to differential geometry and many more. And this is why mathematicians love plants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was absolutely amazing lecture. Thank you. We have a few minutes for some questions. So if there's anyone in the hall here who would like to ask a question, hands are going. OK, I can see, actually, there's one right there next to you, Sarah. So we could start with that one, and then we'll come over to you.
Do not ask me how to save your plants. I have no idea.
Much appreciated. I remember what you said about counterclockwise and clockwise different numbers.
Yeah.
So how it links with the right and left lecture that you did last time?
Yeah, very good question. So as we were writing last year, with Derek Moulton and Adrien Oliveri, a big review on chirality, we said, oh, there is that interesting aspect that the number of spiral are not the same, all that. And we did ask around the specialist people who've written books about that, what they knew. And essentially, what we gather, that aspect is mostly random. That means 50-50. In plants, you find 21-34 one way, and the other one you find 34-21 the other way. So there is no clear notion of chirality there that we know of. It's still quite interesting. Another aspect is whether or not establishing these leaves at different angle improve the overall stability. One of the big questions is we do not know by the end of the day why that numbers, as I said, why that special divergence angle is selected through evolution. Is there something related to fitness, and that has not been established? For instance, the capture of light has not been established. Whether or not it helps for light capture has been proposed, but it doesn't seem to work either.
Thank you. And then there was one over here, and then we'll have one or two from online.
Thank you for a very interesting lecture. My question's on not on plants, but on the Fibonacci sequence. Something I've never got my head around. To the nearest whole number, as far as I know, 13 kilometers is 8 miles, 21 kilometers is 13 miles, 34 kilometers is 21 miles. I think the mile came before the kilometer. So why is it that, and I know in the end it's the conversion factor 1.618, whoever it was that defined the kilometre, was it by chance this happened, or was there some sort of plan by a
That's a great question. It's completely unrelated, as far as I know, it's completely unrelated to Fibonacci, but it's a very good trick when you run and want to make, or you go on American highway and wants to know the change from miles to kilometer. If you know 8 miles or 13 kilometers, you can jump on the next Fibonacci numbers. So the mile has a long history related to foot and that, but the kilometer was completely done independently. That's a product of the meter, and that was done by the French, and the idea was to measure the size of the Earth and then divide it by 40,000 kilometers. And that's how they established the meter in Paris, the one that's still there. So the establishment of the meter was done completely independent from the mile. I think they wanted something close to a yard or something like that, but they choose that number 40,000 as it's a fraction of the Earth diameter. And there is a beautiful story that maybe one day I can explain. I'll talk about planets in TCA again. I don't know if I'll have time to mention that. But the story of how this measurement was made is also quite fascinating. It's great scientific adventure, the measurement of the Earth.
Thank you. Yeah. So we'll have a couple of questions from online. In fact, so there was one question, but you already answered it in your lecture, which was, is there a real-world application of this? But it's for fighting crime, so that's great. So the other question is, very near to the start, you showed that lovely broccoli, and you mentioned fractals. And so this person online wants to know, why are fractals used, or why do plants use fractals?
Yeah, so plants naturally use fractal. I mean, the broccoli is part of that very big family of different vegetables that have been manipulated over the year to stop the normal development at different points. And what you see, the simplest explanation for the Romanesco, is that there is an instability in the development process, and there are pathways that are known, or it happens. That means that the development process doesn't carry on normally as it should, and the new bud that's created revert to itself to a meristem. So each of these create new little meristem that keeps developing and developing and developing. And so that's because of this type of loop. But it's, as far as I know, it's a purely human creation and manipulation, manipulation of different plantae. Yes, but the real-world application, understanding development of plant and how to control it, is crucially important. And so the people who study that, they don't just for the love of numbers. They say, yes, we know about Fibonacci. What they really want to know is how a different stressor or the mechanic plays a role in development of plant, so that they can best control plant and find the type of plant that would grow in certain conditions. So it's all part of understanding plant development. And that's very important for the future of the planet, of course, and for the ability that we have of feeding the population, feeding ourselves.
Okay, so this will be the last question that this young lady's hand went right up.
Thank you. It was very interesting. I got lost a bit with some of the math, but then that's never been my strong point. Where do you sit on the question whether we invented math, and yet we find that nature is already using the math that we invented? Where do you sit on that?
I don't
Simple
know.
question for the last one.
Is there a line? I think that you can, okay, the problem is there like truths that are eternal, completely independent of us humans? And whatever you do, 1 + 1 = 2 independently of where we exist. So there are equality that are there. But the math that we do, I'm completely convinced, is done through our brain, to ability to understand the world around us and impressed by the world around us. And so a lot of the math that we do a selection of truths that we are able to understand at the cognitive process. They are much more complicated math that our brain is not able to access. So you can think of it that there are infinitely many truths in mathematics, but the mathematics that we have is limited first by our ability to understand it and reach it, but also our aesthetic for certain type of mathematics rather than other. We select the problem or the result that we like. I can write as many theorems as I want. It says 1 + 1 = 2, and I can go on forever. These have no interest. So we pick the theorems that we like based on our sense of aesthetic. And our sense of aesthetics come from the outside world and come from appreciation of the world, implicitly or explicitly. And I think a lot of the structure that we see is a reflection of that. So some people go directly and says, I want to understand the little Daisy. That's little Alan Turing as a kid. It says to his mother, we have drawings and all that, looking at Daisy, trying to understand the structure. So that directly trying to understand that and finding the mathematics. But we're also mathematicians that go around the world and think about stuff that are implicitly or unconsciously impressed by the world and use the visual cortex to do a lot of the processing of geometry and all that. It's very related to brain activities. And so I think the mathematics is in part the product of the way the brain works. That's my view on it, on short answer.
That's a wonderful answer to that question. Wonderful. Okay, so we'll finish there. Thank you so much, Alain. Let's give him another big round of applause.